You're at your rehearsal dinner, surrounded by family and friends, toasting to your perfect wedding tomorrow. The love of your life is sitting right beside you. Everything feels magical. Then, your maid of honor stands up with tears in her eyes and screams across the entire restaurant, "I'm pregnant with your fiancé's baby!" Your world crashes down in front of 80 guests. But what the medical records revealed 3 weeks later? That was something nobody saw coming.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jenna, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life mapped out. I was marrying Marcus Thompson, my college sweetheart of 6 years, in what was supposed to be the wedding of the century at the historic Riverside Manor in Charleston. Everything had been planned to perfection. The flowers, the music, the 7-course dinner, even the weather forecast looked ideal. The night before our wedding, we held our rehearsal dinner at Magnolia Gardens, this stunning waterfront restaurant that had been booked solid for months. 80 of our closest family and friends gathered under twinkling lights overlooking the harbor. My parents, Robert and Catherine Mitchell, had flown in from Denver. Marcus's family came from all corners of Georgia. My 3 sisters were there with their husbands, my college roommates, Marcus's fraternity brothers, and our entire wedding party. Everything felt surreal in the best possible way. I wore this flowing emerald dress that Marcus had picked out specifically for the occasion. He said it brought out my eyes. The tables were decorated with white peonies and eucalyptus, exactly like I dreamed since I was 12 years old. The champagne was flowing, people were laughing, sharing embarrassing stories about Marcus and I from our college days at University of South Carolina. My maid of honor, Stephanie Walsh, had been my best friend since freshman year. We pledged the same sorority, studied abroad together in Italy, and she was the first person I called when Marcus proposed on Folly Beach 2 years earlier. Stephanie was the kind of friend who remembered your coffee order, sent care packages during finals week, and always knew exactly what to say when life got complicated. She'd been helping me plan this wedding for months, handling everything from dress fittings to vendor meetings when my marketing job got crazy busy. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be intimate and relaxed compared to the formal ceremony planned for the next day. Marcus's father, William, had insisted on giving a toast that went on for 15 minutes about how proud he was of his son's choice in a bride. My dad got emotional talking about watching me grow up and how Marcus reminded him of himself at that age. Even my typically reserved mother stood up and welcomed Marcus into our family with genuine warmth. Marcus looked incredible in his navy suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, that crooked smile that had made me fall in love with him during our sophomore statistics class. He kept reaching for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently whenever someone said something particularly sweet about us. We'd been together through college graduation, his first job at the architectural firm, my promotion to senior marketing manager, apartment hunting in downtown Charleston, and countless lazy Sunday mornings drinking coffee and planning our future. The restaurant staff was exceptional. Our server, Miguel, kept our glasses filled and made sure every detail was perfect. The executive chef, whom I'd worked with for months to finalize the menu, sent out course after course of incredible food. We started with she crab soup, moved to blackened grouper with coconut rice, and finished with their signature bourbon pecan tart that had been featured in Southern Living magazine. About halfway through dinner, around 8:30, the conversation started getting more personal and heartfelt. Marcus's college roommate, David Chen, told the story about how Marcus used to talk about me constantly during our junior year, even before we were officially dating. My sister Amanda shared how she knew Marcus was the one because I'd never brought a guy home for Christmas before him. The whole atmosphere was warm, loving, and exactly what I'd hoped for. Stephanie had been quieter than usual throughout the evening, which I noticed but didn't think much about initially. She'd been dealing with some work stress at her job as a pediatric nurse, and I figured she was just tired from all the wedding preparations. She'd taken on so much responsibility, coordinating the bachelorette party in Savannah, organizing the bridesmaids' dresses, handling logistics that should have been my responsibility. I made a mental note to do something special to thank her after the honeymoon. Marcus's groomsmen were telling increasingly embarrassing stories about his college antics, which had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. His best man, Trevor Rodriguez, shared about the time Marcus tried to impress me by cooking dinner and nearly burned down his apartment. The mood was light, celebratory, and filled with the kind of joy you only get when surrounded by people who truly love you. Around 9 o'clock, my father stood up to give his final toast of the evening. He talked about watching Marcus and I grow together over the years, how Marcus had asked for permission to propose in the most respectful, old-fashioned way, and how excited he was to officially welcome him into the Mitchell family. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude for having such incredible people in my life. That's when Stephanie suddenly pushed back her chair.
The sound of the chair scraping against the wooden floor cut through the warm chatter like a knife. Everyone turned to look at her, expecting another sweet toast or funny story. She was standing behind her seat, gripping the back of the chair so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and she had this wild look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Stephanie," I said softly, concerned, "are you feeling okay?" She didn't respond to me. Instead, she was staring directly at Marcus with an intensity that made the entire table uncomfortable. The restaurant's ambient noise, clinking glasses, quiet conversations from other tables, soft jazz music, seemed to fade into the background. Even the servers noticed something was happening and slowed their movements, sensing the shift in energy. Marcus looked confused, tilting his head slightly, the way he always did when he was trying to figure out a problem. "Stuff? What's going on?" Stephanie's breathing was becoming more rapid and shallow. She kept opening her mouth like she was going to speak, then closing it again. Her hands were shaking visibly now, and I started to stand up, thinking maybe she was having some kind of panic attack or medical emergency. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, but in the quiet restaurant, everyone heard her clearly. My mother leaned forward with concern. "Sweetie, can't do what? Do you need to sit down?" "I can't watch them get married tomorrow," Stephanie said louder, her voice cracking with emotion. "Not when I know what I know. Not when I'm carrying his baby." The words hit the table like a physical blow. I felt my stomach drop to the floor, my vision blurred slightly, and this ringing started in my ears. Around the table, shocked gasps and confused murmurs rippled through our guests. Someone dropped their wine glass, and the sound of crystal shattering on the wooden floor seemed to echo forever. "What did you just say?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the suddenly silent restaurant. Stephanie's composure completely crumbled. Tears were streaming down her face, her mascara creating dark streaks on her cheeks. "I'm pregnant, Marcus. I'm 8 weeks pregnant with your baby." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the distant sound of waves against the harbor, even the soft hum of the restaurant's air conditioning. Every single person at our table was frozen, staring at Stephanie in complete shock. Marcus shot up from his chair so quickly it toppled backward. "That's impossible. That's completely impossible, Stephanie. What are you talking about?" "The night of Jenna's bachelorette party," she sobbed. "You were so drunk you could barely stand. You called me crying about cold feet, about being scared of marriage. I came over to help you, to talk you through it. One thing led to another, and I felt like I was watching this scene happen to someone else. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening at my rehearsal dinner, in front of my entire family, the night before my wedding. Stephanie, my best friend since college, the person I trusted more than anyone except Marcus, claimed she was pregnant by my fiancé?" "You're lying," Marcus said firmly, his architect's logical mind trying to process something that made no sense. "Jenna's bachelorette party was in Savannah. I was here in Charleston that entire weekend. I never called you, I never saw you, and we certainly never—" "Yes, you did," Stephanie interrupted, her voice becoming hysterical. "It was 2 months ago, the Saturday night when they all went to that rooftop bar. You were at your apartment, completely wasted, calling everyone on your contact list because you were panicking about the wedding."
My bridesmaids, who had been at that bachelorette party, were looking at each other with confusion and horror. My sister Lisa, who had planned most of the Savannah weekend, shook her head slowly. Marcus wasn't with us, but I remember Steph disappeared for several hours that night. She said she had a family emergency. The pieces of this nightmare were starting to form a picture that made my chest feel like it was caving in. I looked at Marcus, searching his face for any sign that this could be true, any indication that the man I'd planned to spend my life with had betrayed me with my closest friend. His face was a mixture of shock, anger, and something that looked like genuine confusion. Stephanie, I don't know what's happening here, but you need to stop. This isn't true. None of this happened. I have proof, she whispered through her tears. I have the pregnancy test. I have the ultrasound photos. I have the text messages you sent me that night. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Other diners were staring at our table, some holding their phones like they were recording this disaster. The staff had retreated to give us privacy, but I could see our server Miguel speaking urgently to the manager near the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick up my water glass. My mother reached over and placed her hand on my arm, but I couldn't feel her touch. Everything felt distant and surreal, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life falling apart. "Show me," Marcus demanded, his voice steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "Show me these text messages right now." Stephanie fumbled with her purse, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. She scrolled through something, then held the screen toward Marcus. From where I was sitting, I could see there were indeed text messages, but I couldn't make out the content.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Marcus took the phone and read for what felt like an eternity. His expression changed from anger to confusion to something I couldn't identify. He looked up at Stephanie, then at me, then back at the phone. "These messages," he started, then stopped. "Stephanie, these messages don't sound like me. The way they're written, the things they say." "You were drunk," she insisted. "You were scared and vulnerable, and you needed someone. I was trying to be a good friend to both of you, but things got complicated." I finally found my voice, though it came out hoarse and unfamiliar. "Stephanie, look at me." She turned toward me, her face streaked with tears and shame. "Is this really happening? Are you really telling me that you slept with Marcus and you're pregnant?" She nodded, unable to speak. The restaurant around us might as well have disappeared. Our families, our friends, the beautiful decorations, the celebration we'd planned for months, none of it mattered anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my relationship, my future, had just been shattered by the person I trusted most in the world. Marcus was still staring at the phone, scrolling through messages, his face getting paler by the minute. "Jenna," he said quietly, "something about this isn't right. These messages, the timeline, something doesn't add up." But I couldn't hear him anymore. The ringing in my ears had gotten louder, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I stood up from the table, my legs unsteady, and walked toward the restaurant's exit without saying a word to anyone. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting, voices talking over each other, chairs scraping, someone crying. But all I could focus on was getting outside, getting air, getting away from the nightmare that had just destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I spent the rest of that night walking along Charleston's waterfront, my phone buzzing constantly with calls and texts that I couldn't bring myself to answer. The salty air felt cold against my tear-stained face, and the city lights blurred together as I tried to process what had just happened. By the time I finally made it back to my apartment around midnight, there were 17 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from my mother, and countless messages from wedding guests asking if I was okay. Marcus was waiting outside my building, still in his navy suit from dinner, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Jenna, please," he said as soon as he saw me. "We need to talk about this.
None of it makes sense. I walked past him toward my front door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. What part doesn't make sense, Marcus? The part where my maid of honor is pregnant with your baby, or the part where you both hid it from me until our rehearsal dinner? All of it. He followed me up the stairs to my second-floor apartment. I swear on my mother's life, I never touched Stephanie. I've never been alone with her, never called her crying, never sent those messages she showed us. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto my couch, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The wedding dress hanging in my closet, the honeymoon tickets to Greece sitting on my kitchen counter, the life we'd planned together, it all felt like evidence of my own stupidity. Marcus sat across from me in the armchair we'd picked out together at a furniture store in North Charleston 6 months ago. The night she's talking about, when you were in Savannah for your bachelorette party, I was working late at the office. I had that big presentation for the Morrison project the following Monday. David can confirm it. He was there with me until almost 11. Then explain the text messages, Marcus. Explain how she knows things about your apartment, about your fears regarding marriage, about details that only someone close to you would know. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make thousands of times when he was stressed about work deadlines or family issues. I don't know, but something about those messages felt off when I read them. The language, the way sentences were structured, it didn't sound like how I text. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister Amanda calling from the hotel where most of our out-of-town guests were staying. I finally answered. Jenna, thank God. Amanda's voice was filled with relief and concern. Mom and Dad are worried sick. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? I'm fine, I lied, watching Marcus pace around my living room like a caged animal. What's happening at the hotel? It's chaos. Half the wedding guests are talking about leaving town early, the other half are asking if the ceremony is still happening tomorrow. Stephanie locked herself in her room and won't answer the door. Uncle Richard is demanding to know if he should cancel his flight back to Atlanta. The wedding. In all the emotional turmoil, I'd almost forgotten that in 12 hours, I was supposed to be walking down the aisle at Riverside Manor in front of 200 people. The flowers had already been delivered, the musicians were confirmed, the photographer was probably reviewing her shot list for tomorrow morning.
I don't know if there's going to be a wedding, I said quietly, and heard Amanda's sharp intake of breath. Jenna, you don't have to make that decision tonight. Maybe sleep on it. Think clearly in the morning when you're not in shock. After hanging up with Amanda, Marcus and I sat in heavy silence. The apartment felt strange and unfamiliar, like I was seeing it through different eyes. The framed photos of us throughout the years, spring break in Myrtle Beach, his graduation from architecture school, my company's Christmas party, our engagement photos at Magnolia Plantation, they all seemed like relics from someone else's life. I want to see Stephanie, I said suddenly. I want to hear this story directly from her, without 80 people staring at us. Marcus nodded immediately. Yes, let's go to her hotel room right now and figure out what's really happening. The Hampton Inn downtown was a 15-minute drive from my apartment. Most of our wedding party was staying there, and as we walked through the lobby at nearly 1 in the morning, I recognized several familiar faces in the bar area. My college roommate Jennifer was there with her husband, Marcus's cousin Bradley, and a few others, all looking shell-shocked and whispering among themselves. Stephanie's room was on the 4th floor. I knocked softly, not wanting to wake other guests, but got no response. After several attempts, I called her cell phone and could hear it ringing inside the room. Stephanie, I know you're in there, I said through the door. We need to talk, just the 3 of us. Finally, I heard movement, and the door opened just enough for Stephanie to peek out. Her face was swollen from crying, her hair was a mess, and she was wearing an oversized University of South Carolina t-shirt that I recognized as one I'd left at her apartment months ago. I can't face you both right now, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Jenna. I never wanted it to happen like this. Like what, exactly? Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm but not aggressive. Because I'm still trying to understand what you think happened between us.
Stephanie opened the door wider and let us into her hotel room. The space was small and cramped, with wedding planning materials scattered everywhere: seating charts, timeline schedules, emergency contact lists. On the dresser, I noticed a small white stick that looked like a pregnancy test and what appeared to be an ultrasound photo. "Tell us everything," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "From the beginning. What happened the night of my bachelorette party?" Stephanie sat in the room's single chair, clutching a tissue box. It was around 10:30 that Saturday night. I had stepped outside the rooftop bar to get some air because I was feeling overwhelmed by all the wedding talk. That's when my phone rang. She looked directly at Marcus. "It was you. You were crying, slurring your words, saying you were scared about getting married. You said you loved Jenna, but weren't sure if you were ready for such a big commitment." Marcus shook his head. "I never made that call. I was at my office working on blueprints with David until almost 11. Then I went home and fell asleep watching SportsCenter. I can show you my phone records." "You called from a different number," Stephanie insisted. "You said your phone had died and you were using someone else's phone. You begged me to come over, said you needed someone to talk to who knew both of us well." Something about her story felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced these details multiple times. But at the same time, Stephanie had been my best friend for 6 years. Why would she fabricate something so elaborate and destructive? "So, what happened when you got to his apartment?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I told the other girls I had a family emergency and took an Uber back to Charleston. When I got to Marcus's place, he was a mess. Empty beer bottles on the coffee table, still in his work clothes from Friday. He kept talking about cold feet, about wondering if he was settling down too young." Marcus was staring at her with genuine bewilderment. "Stephanie, I don't understand why you're saying these things. My apartment was clean that weekend because I'd spent Friday night organizing files for the Morrison presentation. I never drink beer. You know I'm allergic to hops." That detail hit me like a slap. Stephanie did know about Marcus's allergy. She'd been there when he accidentally had a beer at a barbecue 2 years ago and broke out in hives. Why would she include such an easily disprovable detail in her story? "You were different that night," she continued, but her voice was becoming less certain, "more vulnerable than I'd ever seen you. We talked for hours about relationships, about commitment, about what marriage really means. And then what?" I pressed, even though I didn't want to hear the answer. "We kissed. It just happened. We were both emotional, and one thing led to another. Afterward, we both knew it was a terrible mistake. Marcus made me promise never to tell you because it would destroy our friendship and ruin your wedding."
The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning unit. I studied Stephanie's face, looking for any sign of deception, but she seemed genuinely distressed and ashamed. Yet Marcus's confusion appeared equally authentic. "Show me the ultrasound," Marcus said quietly. "If you're really pregnant, show me the medical documentation." Stephanie reached for the papers on the dresser and handed them to Marcus with shaking hands. He examined them carefully, and I watched his expression change from skepticism to something more complex. "These are from Women's Health Associates," he said slowly. "The date shows the appointment was 3 days ago. But Stephanie," he looked up at her with a puzzled expression, "this ultrasound shows you're about 6 weeks pregnant, not 8. If what you're claiming happened 2 months ago, the timing doesn't match up." Stephanie's face went pale. Maybe I miscounted. Maybe it was more recent than I remembered." "When exactly did this supposedly happen?" Marcus asked, his architect's mind clearly working through timelines and logistics. Stephanie fumbled with her words. "It was the night of the bachelorette party. I'm sure it was." "The bachelorette party was 9 weeks ago," I said quietly, remembering because I'd specifically planned it to give us enough time to recover before the wedding. "If you're 6 weeks pregnant, the timing is completely wrong." Stephanie started crying harder, but something in her tears felt different now, less like shame and more like panic. "I'm confused about the dates," she sobbed. "Everything has been so overwhelming.
Maybe it wasn't that specific night. Maybe it was another time when Marcus called me upset. Marcus stood up abruptly. There was no other time, Stephanie. I have never called you upset about anything. I've barely spoken to you one-on-one in the entire 6 years I've known you. I felt a cold realization washing over me. Stephanie, who is the father of your baby? She looked at me with terror in her eyes, and I knew at that moment that everything she'd told us was a lie. The silence in that hotel room stretched endlessly. Stephanie's face had gone from pale to completely ashen, and her hands were trembling so violently she dropped the tissue box she'd been clutching. Stephanie, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt, who is the father of your baby? She opened her mouth several times, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "It's complicated." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Complicated? You just destroyed my relationship, humiliated both of us in front of our families, and potentially ruined our wedding. Nothing could be more complicated than that." "You don't understand," Stephanie said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was trying to protect someone." "Protect who?" I demanded, standing up from the bed. The pieces of this puzzle were scattered everywhere, but none of them fit together in any logical way. Stephanie buried her face in her hands. "My brother." I felt my stomach drop. Stephanie's younger brother Jake was 22, fresh out of college, and had been struggling with addiction issues for the past year. He'd been in and out of rehab programs, and Stephanie had been supporting him financially and emotionally throughout his recovery process. "Jake," Marcus said, clearly as confused as I was. "What does Jake have to do with any of this?" "He's been clean for 3 months," Stephanie said through her tears. "He got a job at a construction company in North Charleston. He's been going to NA meetings. He was finally getting his life back together. But then—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "But then what?" I pressed, though part of me dreaded hearing the answer. "He started dating this girl, Rebecca. She's 25, works as a bartender at that sports bar on King Street. They've been together for about 2 months, and things got serious really fast." Too fast. Marcus was pacing again, trying to follow the thread of this story. "Stephanie, I still don't understand what this has to do with you claiming to be pregnant with my baby." "Rebecca found out she was pregnant 3 weeks ago. She told Jake, and he completely panicked. He's barely keeping his sobriety together. He's working a minimum wage job. He has no savings, no insurance, no way to support a child. He was terrified that the stress would make him relapse." The hotel room felt like it was closing in on us. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of downtown Charleston, late-night traffic, people leaving bars, the normal sounds of a city that had no idea my entire world was collapsing. "So Rebecca asked Jake to tell his family about the pregnancy," Stephanie continued. "She wanted to meet us, wanted to discuss how we could all support them through this. But Jake was too ashamed. He begged me not to tell our parents yet because he was afraid they'd think he was screwing up his recovery." I sat back down on the bed, trying to process this information. "Stephanie, none of this explains why you stood up at my rehearsal dinner and claimed you were pregnant with Marcus." "Rebecca was getting impatient with Jake's secrecy. She threatened to break up with him if he didn't tell his family by this weekend. She said she wasn't going to raise a baby with someone who was ashamed of her and their child." Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face Stephanie directly. "So you decided to create this elaborate lie about me. What, distract from your brother's situation?" "No," Stephanie said quickly. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Rebecca came to my apartment yesterday afternoon, really upset. She said Jake had been avoiding her calls and she was worried he was using again. She was crying, talking about how scared she was to be a single mother, how she didn't know what to do." "And," I prompted, though I was beginning to see where this might be heading. "She asked me to take a pregnancy test with her. She'd bought 2 tests from the pharmacy but was too nervous to take it alone. We both took the tests at the same time, just for moral support." The pregnancy test on Stephanie's dresser suddenly made more sense, but I still didn't understand the connection to Marcus. "Both tests came back positive," Stephanie said quietly. Rebecca's because she's actually pregnant, and mine because... She trailed off again, and Marcus finished the thought. Because you took Rebecca's positive test and claimed it was yours. Stephanie nodded miserably. At first, it was just a stupid mistake. We mixed up the tests when we were both crying and upset. I realized later that I'd taken her positive test home with me by accident. But then, when Rebecca went to her first doctor's appointment on Monday, she asked me to go with her for support. The ultrasound, I said, understanding Dawn. You have Rebecca's ultrasound photos. She gave me copies because she wanted Jake's family to see them, to understand how real this pregnancy is. She thought it might help convince Jake to be more open about their relationship. Marcus was staring at Stephanie with a mixture of anger and disbelief. So you had Rebecca's pregnancy test and her ultrasound photos. But that still doesn't explain why you decided to claim I was the father. Stephanie's next words came out in a rush, like she was trying to get the whole story out before she lost her nerve. Rebecca has been putting so much pressure on Jake to tell our parents. She kept saying that if he was too ashamed to claim his own child, maybe she should find someone who would. She was talking about breaking up with him and raising the baby alone. That's heartbreaking, I said, and I meant it. But Stephanie, you still haven't explained the connection to Marcus. Yesterday evening, after Rebecca left my apartment, I was holding her ultrasound photos and thinking about how devastated Jake would be if she left him. I knew he was finally getting his life together, and losing Rebecca and the baby might send him spiraling back into addiction. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I started thinking about ways to help them. Maybe if I could convince Rebecca that Jake's family was supportive and involved, she'd be more patient with his timeline for telling our parents. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair. So you decided to pretend to be pregnant yourself? It started as a practice run, Stephanie said, her voice barely audible. I thought if I could figure out how to tell difficult pregnancy news to people I cared about, I could help coach Jake through telling our parents about Rebecca. The logic was so twisted and desperate that it almost made sense in a completely insane way. But there was still one huge piece missing. Stephanie, I said carefully, why did you choose Marcus as your fake baby daddy? Why not make up some random guy or claim you didn't know who the father was? Because I panicked, she admitted. When I stood up at the rehearsal dinner, I hadn't planned to say anything. But seeing everyone so happy, talking about love and commitment and family, I kept thinking about Jake and Rebecca and how scared they both are. I wanted to say something about how sometimes life throws you curveballs, how sometimes people make mistakes but still deserve support and love. And somehow that turned into claiming you were pregnant with my fiancé? I asked incredulously. I was trying to create a scenario where I could see how people would react to unexpected pregnancy news. I thought if I could gauge everyone's responses, I could help prepare Jake and Rebecca for telling their families. Marcus shook his head slowly. So you chose me as your fictional baby daddy, because why exactly?
Because I knew it wasn't true, Stephanie said miserably. I knew you'd never cheat on Jenna. I knew you'd deny everything. And I thought after everyone calmed down, I could admit I made the whole thing up and explain about Jake and Rebecca. I thought people would be so relieved that you hadn't actually cheated that they'd be more understanding about the real pregnancy situation. I stared at her in complete shock. You thought people would be relieved? Stephanie, you destroyed my rehearsal dinner, traumatized our families, and nearly ended my relationship because you wanted to test how people react to pregnancy announcements? I know how it sounds, she said desperately. I know it was insane, but I was so worried about Jake, and Rebecca was so upset, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought I could fix everything afterward. But once I said the words, everyone reacted so strongly that I couldn't take them back. The hotel room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the elevator dinging as late-night guests returned to their rooms, probably after celebrating normal, non-dramatic occasions. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Charleston skyline. Stephanie, do you understand what you've done to us? What have you put Jenna through?
I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt either of you. I was just trying to help my brother, and everything spiraled completely out of control. I looked at the pregnancy test and ultrasound photos on the dresser, physical evidence of someone else's real pregnancy that had somehow become the centerpiece of my personal nightmare. Where is Rebecca now? I asked. Does she know you used her pregnancy to create this disaster? Stephanie's face went even paler. She has no idea. She thinks I'm keeping her test results and ultrasound photos to show Jake when he's ready to tell our parents. The full scope of the deception was starting to sink in. Not only had Stephanie lied to Marcus and me, but she'd also essentially stolen another woman's pregnancy documentation for her elaborate scheme. We need to call Rebecca, Marcus said firmly, right now. She deserves to know how her private medical information has been used. Please don't, Stephanie begged. If Rebecca finds out what I did, she'll definitely leave Jake. And if Jake finds out that I tried to help him by destroying your relationship, he'll never forgive me. I realized that in all of this chaos, we still hadn't addressed the most important question. What were Marcus and I going to do about our wedding, which was supposed to happen in less than 10 hours? At 2:30 in the morning, sitting in a hotel room surrounded by the wreckage of someone else's lies, I made the hardest decision of my adult life. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The first call was to my parents' room, 3 floors down. My father answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Jenna, sweetheart, are you okay?" "Dad, I need you and Mom to come to Stephanie's room right now, room 427, and call Marcus's parents too. We need everyone here. Is everything all right? Do we need to call a doctor?" I looked at Stephanie, who was still crying quietly in the corner chair, and at Marcus, who was staring out the window like he was trying to process everything that had happened. "Just come up, Dad. We'll explain everything." Within 15 minutes, my parents arrived, looking worried and exhausted, followed shortly by Marcus's parents, William and Helen Thompson. Both couples were still in their pajamas and robes, clearly having been awakened from deep sleep. My mother immediately went to Stephanie, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Honey, you look terrible. Are you feeling sick?" "Mom, sit down," I said gently. "Everyone needs to sit down. Stephanie has something to tell all of you." The hotel room was cramped with 6 adults, but everyone found a place to perch, on the bed, in the chair, leaning against the dresser. The atmosphere was tense and confused, with everyone looking between Stephanie, Marcus, and me for answers. "Stephanie," Marcus said firmly, "tell them the truth, all of it." For the next 20 minutes, Stephanie recounted her entire deception. Her brother Jake's secret girlfriend Rebecca, the real pregnancy, the switched test results, her misguided attempt to help by creating a fake scandal. My parents listened with growing shock and anger, while Marcus's parents looked bewildered and hurt. When Stephanie finished speaking, the silence in the room was deafening. My father, who rarely raised his voice, was the first to speak. "Stephanie, do you understand what you've done? You've traumatized 2 families, humiliated my daughter and Marcus in front of everyone we love, and potentially destroyed years of relationships over a lie." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm so sorry."
Helen Thompson, Marcus's mother, spoke up with barely contained fury. "Sorry doesn't fix this, young lady. Do you have any idea what we've been through tonight? I called my sister in Atlanta at midnight crying because I thought my son had cheated on his fiancé. William had to talk me out of driving back to Georgia because I was so ashamed." Marcus sat down on the bed next to me and took my hand. The question now is, what do we do about the wedding? Everyone turned to look at me, and I realized that despite everything that had happened, the decision ultimately came down to Marcus and me. Our families could be angry, Stephanie could be remorseful, but in 7 hours, guests would start arriving at Riverside Manor expecting to witness our marriage. "I need to call Rebecca," I said suddenly, "right now. She deserves to know what happened to her medical information, and Jake needs to know what his sister did to try to help him." Stephanie's face went white. "Jenna, please, if you call Rebecca now, you'll destroy everything. Jake will relapse, Rebecca will leave him, and my family will fall apart."
Your family? My mother's voice was sharp with indignation. What about our family? What about Marcus's family? You were willing to destroy our relationships to protect yours? Marcus squeezed my hand. Do you have Rebecca's number? It's in Stephanie's phone, I said, under the contacts for her brother's girlfriend. Stephanie reluctantly handed over her phone, and I scrolled through until I found Rebecca's contact information. It was almost 3 a.m., but some conversations couldn't wait for a more convenient time. The phone rang 4 times before a sleepy voice answered. Hello? Stephanie? Is everything okay? Is Jake all right? Hi, Rebecca. This isn't Stephanie. My name is Jenna Mitchell. I'm Stephanie's friend, and I need to talk to you about something very important. Oh, Rebecca's voice became more alert. Is Stephanie okay? She seemed really upset when she left my apartment yesterday. I took a deep breath. Rebecca, I need to ask you about the pregnancy test you took with Stephanie yesterday and the ultrasound photos from your doctor's appointment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. How do you know about that? Stephanie promised she wouldn't tell anyone until Jake was ready to tell his parents. Rebecca, Stephanie used your pregnancy test and your ultrasound photos to convince people that she was pregnant. She claimed the baby was my fiancé's. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Rebecca's voice came back, tight with anger. She did what? I explained the entire situation, the rehearsal dinner, Stephanie's accusation against Marcus, the timeline inconsistencies that led to the truth. With each detail, I could hear Rebecca's breathing becoming more rapid and agitated. Let me get this straight, Rebecca said when I finished. Stephanie took my medical information and used it to fake a pregnancy with someone else's boyfriend at their rehearsal dinner in front of their families? That's exactly what happened. Oh my God, I trusted her. I asked her to keep this private until Jake was ready to tell his parents, and she used my pregnancy to destroy your relationship? Marcus leaned closer to the phone. Rebecca, this is Marcus, Jenna's fiancé. None of us blame you for any of this. You're as much a victim of Stephanie's deception as we are. Is Jake there? Rebecca asked. Does he know what his sister did? I looked at Stephanie, who was shaking her head desperately. No, Jake doesn't know yet. But Rebecca, you have the right to tell him yourself if you want to. Damn right I do, Rebecca said, and I could hear her moving around, probably getting dressed. I'm coming over there right now. What hotel are you at? After giving Rebecca the hotel information, I hung up and looked around the crowded room. My parents looked exhausted, Marcus's parents looked angry, Stephanie looked terrified, and Marcus looked like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. She's coming here? Stephanie asked weakly. She's coming here, I confirmed, and she's probably going to call Jake on the way. This is going to destroy my family, Stephanie said, fresh tears starting. My father stood up, his patience finally exhausted. Stephanie, your family was never our responsibility to protect. Our family was your responsibility to protect, and you failed spectacularly. 20 minutes later, there was an aggressive knock on the hotel room door. I opened it to find a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing jeans and an oversized sweatshirt, looking furious and determined. Are you Jenna? She asked. I'm Jenna. You must be Rebecca. She stepped into the already crowded room and immediately spotted Stephanie cowering in the corner. You, she said, pointing directly at her. What the hell is wrong with you? Before Stephanie could answer, Rebecca continued. I trusted you. I asked you to help me support Jake through a difficult time, and you stole my pregnancy to play some sick game with your friends? It wasn't a game, Stephanie said weakly. I was trying to help you and Jake. Help us? Rebecca's voice rose. How does destroying someone else's relationship help us? How does lying to entire families help us? How does stealing my medical information help us? Marcus stepped forward. Rebecca, has Jake been told what happened yet? Oh, he knows, Rebecca said grimly. I called him on the drive over here.
He's in his car right now, driving here from North Charleston, and he is pissed." As if summoned by her words, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was a young man who looked like a taller, more disheveled version of Stephanie. Jake Walsh was clearly upset, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Steph," he said as soon as he saw his sister, "what the fuck did you do?" The hotel room, which had already been cramped with 6 people, now felt impossibly small with 8 adults and enough emotional baggage to fill the entire building. Jake looked around the room, taking in the scene. 2 sets of parents in pajamas, his pregnant girlfriend, his sister who looked like she'd been crying for hours, and 2 people he'd never met but who were obviously the victims of whatever disaster Stephanie had created. "You must be Jenna and Marcus," he said, his voice heavy with mortification. "I am so fucking sorry for what my sister did to you." "Jake," Rebecca said firmly, "tell them about the pregnancy, the real pregnancy, your pregnancy." Jake looked at his sister with a mixture of love and betrayal that broke my heart. Then he turned to face the room full of strangers and said, "Rebecca is 6 weeks pregnant with my baby. We've been together for 2 months, and yes, it happened fast, but we're in love and we want to make this work. I was scared to tell my family because I'm still in recovery, and I didn't want anyone to think I was screwing up my sobriety. But I was going to tell them this week, before the baby news got too hard to hide." He looked directly at his sister. "I never asked you to fix this for me, Steph. I never asked you to lie or steal or hurt innocent people to make my situation easier." Stephanie was sobbing now, the weight of everyone's anger and disappointment crushing down on her. "I just wanted to help. I was so scared you'd lose Rebecca and the baby, and that stress would make you start using again." "So instead, you decided to destroy other people's relationships?" Jake asked incredulously. "How does that make sense in any universe?" I looked at my watch. It was nearly 4 a.m. In 4 hours, vendors would start arriving at Riverside Manor to set up for a wedding that might or might not happen. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we need to make a decision. Do we get married today or not?" Marcus and I looked at each other across that crowded hotel room, and in that moment, I saw everything I needed to see. Despite the chaos, despite the lies, despite having our most intimate moment turned into a public spectacle, he was still the man I'd fallen in love with in that statistics class 6 years ago. "Yes," I said quietly, "we're getting married today." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and relieved sighs. My mother started crying happy tears, and Marcus's father clapped his hands together with satisfaction. Marcus smiled for the first time in hours. "Are you sure? After everything that's happened?" "I'm sure," I said, taking his hand. "Stephanie's lies don't change anything about us. They don't change how I feel about you, or how you've handled this situation, or how much I want to spend my life with you." Jake stepped forward, looking relieved but still ashamed. "Jenna, Marcus, I know this doesn't fix anything, but Rebecca and I want to pay for whatever damage tonight caused. If vendors need to be called, if deposits were lost, if people had to change travel plans." "That's very kind," Marcus said, "but this isn't your responsibility to fix, Jake. You didn't create this situation." Rebecca was still staring at Stephanie with disgust. "But we are going to fix the situation Stephanie created for us. Jake, we're telling your parents about the pregnancy today. No more secrets, no more delays." "I agree," Jake said firmly. "I should have done that weeks ago instead of being scared about their reaction." My father checked his watch. "It's 4 a.m. If we're really doing this wedding, we need to start making phone calls. The vendors, the photographer, the musicians, they all need to know the ceremony is still happening." "I'll handle the vendor calls," Marcus's mother Helen said efficiently. "I'll call the hotel and let our guests know the wedding is proceeding as planned. People need time to get ready." As our parents started organizing logistics, I turned to face Stephanie, who was still huddled in the corner chair looking completely devastated. "Stephanie," I said, and she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "We need to talk. Just us."
Marcus squeezed my hand supportively, then guided everyone else toward the door. Let's give them some privacy. When the room finally emptied, leaving just Stephanie and me, the silence felt different. Not tense or angry, but sad and final. I don't expect you to forgive me, Stephanie said quietly. I know what I did was unforgivable. I sat down on the bed across from her. Steph, we've been best friends for 6 years. I need to understand how we got here. Not the story about Jake and Rebecca, but the real reason you were willing to destroy my relationship. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up at me. I was jealous. The honesty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Jealous of what? Of everything, she said, tears starting fresh. Your perfect relationship, your beautiful wedding, your successful career, the way Marcus looks at you like you hung the moon. For 6 years, I've watched you have this amazing life while I've been struggling with Jake's addiction, working double shifts at the hospital, never having time or money or energy for my own relationships. I felt my heart breaking, not for myself, but for the friend I thought I knew. Stephanie, why didn't you ever tell me you were struggling? I would have helped you. We could have talked about this. Because you were so happy, she said bitterly. Every conversation was about wedding planning, or Marcus's promotion, or your next vacation together. There was never space for me to say that my life was falling apart. That's not fair, I said gently. I asked about your life constantly. Every time, you said everything was fine. Because I didn't want to be the friend who brought you down with her problems. But watching you plan this perfect wedding, seeing how excited everyone was, it just made me so aware of how empty my own life felt. I moved to sit next to her on the chair's arm. So you decided to blow up my wedding because you were jealous? Not consciously, she said quickly. It really did start as wanting to help Jake and Rebecca. But when I stood up at that restaurant and saw everyone's shocked faces, saw how devastated you looked, there was this terrible part of me that felt satisfied. Like finally, your perfect life had a crack in it. The brutal honesty was almost harder to hear than the original lies, but at least now I understood what had really happened. And then, when I realized how much damage I'd done, I panicked and kept digging the hole deeper instead of just admitting the truth immediately, she continued. I was terrified that if you knew the real reason, you'd hate me forever. I might have understood jealousy, I said sadly, but what did you do instead? The elaborate deception, the public humiliation, using someone else's pregnancy? Stephanie, that crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. She nodded, accepting the judgment. I know, I've destroyed everything. Our friendship, my relationship with Jake, Rebecca's trust, your family's opinion of me. And for what? I'm still working double shifts. I'm still alone. And now I'm also a terrible person who hurts the people she loves. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Charleston's skyline as the first hints of dawn started appearing. In 3 hours, I'd be putting on my wedding dress. In 5 hours, I'd be walking down the aisle toward Marcus. I can't have you at the wedding today, I said, without turning around. I know. And I can't have you in my life anymore, not after this. I know, she whispered. I turned back to face her. But Stephanie, I hope you get help. I hope you figure out how to be happy for other people's happiness. And I hope someday you find the life you actually want instead of resenting other people for having theirs. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I really am sorry your life has been so hard. I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth 6 years ago, or 6 months ago, or even 6 hours ago. Jenna, she called as I opened the door. I looked back at her. I really did love you like a sister. That part was never fake. I know, I said sadly. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. I left Stephanie in that hotel room and found Marcus waiting in the hallway with both sets of our parents. The sun was starting to rise over Charleston, and despite everything that had happened, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Sad," I said honestly, "but I'm also ready to marry you." My mother hugged us both. "The vendors have all been contacted. Everyone knows the wedding is happening as planned. Your sisters are already getting ready, and the photographer will meet you at the bridal suite at 9 a.m. Marcus's father smiled broadly. "Son, after tonight, I'm even more convinced you two can handle anything life throws at you." As we all walked toward the elevators, I thought about the medical records that had revealed the truth, not just about Rebecca's pregnancy, but about the real motivations behind Stephanie's deception. Sometimes the most important diagnoses aren't medical at all, but emotional ones that help you understand what's really wrong. 6 hours later, I walked down the aisle at Riverside Manor in my grandmother's restored lace dress, surrounded by 200 people who loved us, toward the man who had stood by me through the strangest, most painful night of my life. The wedding was beautiful. The marriage has been even better.
As for Stephanie, I heard through mutual friends that she started therapy 3 months after our wedding. Jake and Rebecca had a healthy baby boy in February, and Jake has maintained his sobriety throughout fatherhood. They named their son Marcus, not after my husband, but because they said the whole experience taught them the importance of standing by the people you love, even when everything falls apart around you. I never spoke to Stephanie again, but I hope she found her way to the kind of happiness that doesn't require tearing down other people's joy. Some friendships don't survive their biggest test, but the love you shared was real, even when everything else turned out to be a lie. 3 months after our wedding, I was organizing files in our new apartment when I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about that night. Marcus and I had moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom place in the historic district, just 6 blocks from where the rehearsal dinner disaster had unfolded. We'd been blissfully happy, settling into married life, when I discovered a folder of wedding-related documents that Marcus had apparently forgotten about. Inside were printouts of phone records, text message logs, and what looked like a private investigator's report dated just 2 weeks after our wedding. "Marcus?" I called out, holding the folder. He was in the kitchen making coffee, humming one of the songs from our wedding playlist. "What's up, babe?" he said, walking into the living room with 2 steaming mugs. I held up the folder. "What is this?" His face immediately changed, and I saw a flicker of something I couldn't identify. Guilt? Embarrassment? "Where did you find that?" "In the box with our marriage certificate and honeymoon photos." "Marcus, did you hire a private investigator?" He set down the coffee mugs and ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture when he was stressed. "Jenna, sit down. There's something I didn't tell you about that night." My stomach dropped. After everything we'd been through with Stephanie's lies, the idea that Marcus had been keeping secrets felt like a betrayal. "What didn't you tell me?" "I knew Stephanie was lying before she admitted it," he said quietly. "Not about the pregnancy itself, but about me being involved. I knew within minutes of her accusation that something was very wrong." I opened the folder and started reading. The phone records showed Marcus's call history for the 2 months leading up to our wedding. There were no calls to Stephanie's number, no late-night conversations, nothing that would support her timeline. "You had proof the whole time that you didn't call her?" "I had my phone records pulled the next morning," Marcus said. "But Jenna, that's not the important part. Keep reading." I flipped through more pages and found text message logs from a number I didn't recognize. The messages were the ones Stephanie had shown us on her phone that night, the drunk, emotional texts she'd claimed Marcus sent her. But according to the investigator's report, those messages had been sent from a burner phone registered under a fake name. "Marcus, I don't understand. If you knew she was lying, why didn't you show me this immediately?" "Because the investigator found something else," he said, sitting down next to me. Something that made me realize the situation was more complicated than just Stephanie being jealous or trying to help her brother. I kept reading. The next section of the report detailed Stephanie's financial records from the past 6 months. She had significant credit card debt, had taken out a personal loan 3 weeks before our wedding, and had been sending large sums of money to an account that didn't belong to Jake. "She was being blackmailed," Marcus said simply. "What?" I stared at him in shock. "Blackmailed? By who?" Marcus flipped to the final page of the report. There was a photograph of a man I'd never seen before, mid-30s, thin face, dark hair. His name was listed as Connor Hayes. Connor Hayes, Marcus read aloud, age 34, works as a bartender at various establishments around Charleston, has a history of gambling debts and minor fraud charges, and apparently, he's been Rebecca's ex-boyfriend for the past 8 months. I felt the room spinning slightly. Rebecca's ex-boyfriend? But Rebecca is with Jake. According to the investigator, Connor has been trying to win Rebecca back since she started dating Jake. He found out about her pregnancy and threatened to tell Jake that the baby might not be his unless Rebecca paid him $5,000. The pieces were starting to form a picture that was even more twisted than Stephanie's original deception. So Rebecca was being blackmailed by her ex-boyfriend? Not just Rebecca, Marcus said grimly. Connor approached Stephanie and told her that if she didn't help him break up Jake and Rebecca, he would spread rumors around Charleston that Stephanie was stealing drugs from the hospital where she works. I set down the papers, overwhelmed. None of this makes sense. Why would Stephanie go along with blackmail? Why not just call the police? Because Connor was smart, Marcus explained. He had photos of Stephanie taking leftover prescription medications from the hospital's disposal system. She wasn't selling them or using them, she was taking expired pain medication to give to Jake during his worst withdrawal symptoms when he couldn't afford proper medical care. Oh my God. Stephanie was technically committing a crime, even though she was trying to help her brother. Connor threatened to report her to the state nursing board, which would have ended her career and potentially led to criminal charges. I stared at the investigator's report, realizing that everything I thought I knew about that night was wrong. So the whole pregnancy lie, the accusation against you, the public humiliation, that was all because she was being blackmailed? Connor's plan was for Stephanie to create chaos at our wedding, hoping that in the aftermath, Rebecca would turn to him for comfort and leave Jake. He specifically told her to accuse me of being the father because he knew it would create maximum drama and distraction. But why didn't she just tell us the truth when we confronted her at the hotel? Marcus pointed to another section of the report. Because Connor was at the hotel that night, he was staying on the second floor, room 237, watching everything unfold. Stephanie knew that if she revealed the blackmail, he would follow through on his threats immediately. I felt sick thinking about how terrified Stephanie must have been that entire night. Marcus, why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? We could have helped her. I wanted to, he said earnestly, but the investigator advised me to gather all the evidence first before confronting anyone. He was concerned that if Connor realized we were onto him, he might escalate his threats or target other people. What happened to Connor? Marcus smiled grimly. That's where the story gets interesting. The investigator worked with Charleston police to set up a sting operation. They had Rebecca call Connor and pretend she was willing to pay him to leave Jake alone. When he showed up to collect the money, they arrested him for extortion. When was this? 2 weeks after our wedding, while we were on our honeymoon in Greece. Connor is now serving 18 months in state prison for multiple blackmail schemes. Apparently, Stephanie and Rebecca weren't his only victims. I leaned back against the couch cushions, trying to process everything. So Stephanie wasn't just jealous and vindictive, she was scared and trying to protect herself and Jake. That's what the evidence suggests, Marcus said. Don't get me wrong, what she did to us was still terrible, and she still chose to handle it in the worst possible way. But her motivations were more complex than we realized. Have you talked to her? Does she know that you know the truth? Marcus shook his head. The investigator reached out to her after Connor was arrested to let her know she was safe from his threats, but she asked him not to contact us. She said she was too ashamed of what she'd done, regardless of the circumstances. I picked up my coffee mug, though the liquid had gone cold while I was reading. What about Jake and Rebecca? Do they know about Connor's involvement? They found out during the police investigation. Rebecca was devastated that her ex-boyfriend had manipulated the situation so badly. Jake was furious that Stephanie had suffered alone instead of telling him what was happening. And their relationship? Are they still together? Better than ever, according to the investigator. The whole experience made them realize how much they trust and depend on each other. Their baby boy was born healthy in February, and they're engaged now. I stood up and walked to our living room window, looking out at the Charleston street where tourists were taking carriage rides and couples were walking hand in hand. The city looked the same as it had 3 months ago, but everything felt different knowing the truth. Marcus, I feel terrible. All this time, I've been angry at Stephanie for betraying our friendship, when really she was being victimized by someone else. You had every right to be angry, Marcus said, joining me at the window. Even if she was being blackmailed, she still made choices that hurt us. She could have come to us for help instead of going along with Connor's scheme. But she was trying to protect Jake's sobriety and her own career. I can understand why she felt trapped. Marcus put his arm around my shoulders. The investigator said something that stuck with me. He said that victims of blackmail often make decisions that seem irrational to outsiders, but make perfect sense when you're living in fear. Do you think we should reach out to her? Let her know that we understand the situation better now? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. Part of me thinks she deserves to know that Connor can't hurt her anymore. But another part of me thinks maybe she needs space to rebuild her life without reminders of that night. I leaned against my husband, grateful for his wisdom and patience throughout this entire ordeal. What would you want to do if you were in her position? I'd want to know that the people I'd hurt didn't hate me, he said, after thinking for a moment. I'd want a chance to apologize properly, without the fear and panic that were driving my decisions before. Then maybe we should give her that chance. Marcus looked at me with the same expression he'd had when I decided to proceed with our wedding despite the chaos. Are you sure? There's no going back once we open that door. I thought about the past 3 months of marriage, how strong and happy Marcus and I had become, how the crisis had ultimately brought us closer together rather than tearing us apart. I'm sure, I said. Not because I want to resume our friendship. Too much has happened for that. But because everyone deserves the chance to make amends when they've been living under someone else's threats. Marcus kissed the top of my head. Okay, but we do this carefully, and we set clear boundaries about what kind of relationship, if any, we're willing to have going forward. Agreed. That afternoon, I composed a carefully worded email to Stephanie, letting her know that we'd learned about Connor's blackmail and that we understood her situation had been more complicated than we'd initially realized. I made it clear that we weren't seeking to resume our friendship, but that we wanted her to know she was free from the threats that had been controlling her actions. Her response came 3 hours later. It was 2 pages long, filled with genuine remorse and gratitude, and ended with an invitation to meet for coffee if we were ever ready to talk in person. We weren't ready then, and we might never be, but knowing the full truth had lifted a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. 1 year after our wedding, Marcus and I received an unexpected invitation in the mail. It was addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately, though I hadn't seen it in 12 months. Jake Walsh and Rebecca Martinez were getting married. The invitation was simple but elegant, a small ceremony at Magnolia Gardens, the same restaurant where our rehearsal dinner had imploded. At the bottom, in careful script, was a handwritten note. We understand if you can't be there, but it would mean everything to us if you could witness our beginning. We promise, no drama this time. Jake and Rebecca. Marcus found me sitting at our kitchen table, staring at the invitation with mixed emotions. What do you think? He asked, reading over my shoulder. I think it takes courage to get married at the same place where everything fell apart for us, I said. And I think they deserve to have their moment without the shadow of what happened before.
So we're going? I looked at my husband, remembering how calmly he'd handled every twist and turn of our own wedding drama. We're going, but I'm not sure I'm ready to see Stephanie yet. The invitation doesn't mention her being there, Marcus pointed out. Maybe she won't be. 3 weeks later, we dressed carefully for Jake and Rebecca's wedding. I chose a navy blue dress, elegant but not attention-grabbing. Marcus wore a gray suit that made his eyes look incredible. As we drove toward Magnolia Gardens, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't expected. The restaurant looked exactly as I remembered it, but this time it was decorated with simple white flowers and soft lighting. About 40 guests were scattered across the waterfront deck, a much more intimate gathering than our rehearsal dinner had been. Rebecca looked radiant in a cream-colored dress, holding their 6-month-old son, Marcus. Yes, they had actually named him after my husband.
Jake stood beside her in a navy suit, looking healthier and more confident than I'd ever seen him. "Jenna, Marcus!" Rebecca spotted us immediately and hurried over, baby Marcus gurgling happily in her arms. "I can't believe you came. Thank you so much." She looked genuinely grateful and slightly nervous, as if she still wasn't sure we'd forgiven her for being unwittingly involved in the chaos that had nearly destroyed our wedding. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "You both look incredibly happy." Jake approached more cautiously, extending his hand to Marcus first. "Thank you for being here. I know it can't be easy, coming back to this place." "Actually," Marcus said, surprising me, "I'm glad we came. This place deserves some good memories to balance out the dramatic ones." The ceremony was brief and beautiful. Jake and Rebecca had written their own vows, speaking honestly about overcoming challenges, building trust, and creating a family together. Baby Marcus slept peacefully in the arms of Jake's aunt during the ceremony, occasionally making soft sounds that made everyone smile. As they exchanged rings, I found myself thinking about how different their path to marriage had been from ours. They'd faced unexpected pregnancy, family disapproval, addiction recovery, blackmail, and public scandal before finally reaching this moment. Yet here they were, choosing each other again with full knowledge of what they could survive together. During the reception dinner, Jake stood to give a speech. "Rebecca and I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. We know our journey to this moment hasn't been conventional." He paused, looking directly at Marcus and me. "We've made mistakes, hurt people we care about, and learned some hard lessons about honesty and communication. But we've also learned," Rebecca continued, standing beside him, "that real love isn't about having a perfect story. It's about choosing to work through the imperfect parts together." Jake raised his glass. "To second chances, hard-earned wisdom, and the people who stand by you even when you don't deserve it." After dinner, as guests mingled on the waterfront deck, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room. Walking through the restaurant's interior, I was struck by how normal everything looked. The same tables, the same warm lighting, the same view of Charleston Harbor. It was hard to believe this peaceful space had witnessed such dramatic upheaval just a year ago. Coming out of the restroom, I nearly collided with someone entering. "Jenna?" It was Stephanie. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair, and clothes that seemed more professional than I remembered. There were dark circles under her eyes, but she seemed calmer somehow, less frantic than during our last encounter. "Hi, Stephanie." We stood there for a moment, two people who had once been inseparable, now strangers, connected only by shared history. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she said, quietly. "I wasn't sure you would be either." "Jake asked me to stay away from the main reception," she explained. "He said you and Marcus deserve to enjoy the celebration without worrying about running into me. But I wanted to see them get married, so I've been watching from the restaurant's back dining room." "You've been here the whole time?" She nodded. "I couldn't miss Jake's wedding, even if I had to watch from a distance. He's been sober for 18 months now. This whole experience, as awful as it was, somehow motivated him to take his recovery more seriously." "How are you doing?" I asked, and realized I genuinely wanted to know. "Better," she said. "I've been in therapy since right after your wedding, working through a lot of issues I didn't even realize I had. I also changed jobs. I'm working at a clinic in Mount Pleasant now, specializing in addiction recovery counseling." "That sounds like meaningful work." "It is, helping other families navigate what Jake and I went through. And Jenna?" She looked at me directly. "I got your email about Connor and the blackmail situation. Thank you for letting me know the truth came out. It meant more than you probably realize." I studied her face, looking for signs of the desperate, jealous woman who had destroyed my rehearsal dinner. Instead, I saw someone who looked tired but genuine, someone who had clearly been working hard to understand and change herself. "I want you to know," she continued, "that even though Connor was blackmailing me, what I did to you was unforgivable. I had other options. I could have asked for help, called the police, trusted you and Marcus with the truth. Instead, I made choices that hurt innocent people, and I take full responsibility for that. I appreciate you saying that. I also want you to know that watching you and Marcus handle everything with such grace taught me something important about real strength. You didn't let my lies destroy what you'd built together. That's the kind of love I hope to find someday, if I ever get lucky enough. Before I could respond, we heard laughter and applause from the deck. Apparently, Jake and Rebecca were cutting their wedding cake. I should go, Stephanie said. I told Jake I'd leave before the dancing started, so you could enjoy the rest of the evening. Stephanie, wait. She turned back to me.
I can't say we'll ever be friends again, I said honestly. Too much happened, and trust is hard to rebuild. But I can say that I forgive you, and I hope you find happiness. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That's more than I deserve, but thank you. Everyone deserves the chance to make amends and move forward, I said, echoing something Marcus had told me months earlier. I hope your new path brings you peace. She nodded, unable to speak, and walked toward the restaurant's exit. I rejoined the reception, where Marcus was chatting with other guests and occasionally making faces at baby Marcus, who seemed fascinated by my husband's animated expressions. Everything okay? Marcus asked when I slipped my hand into his. Everything's perfect, I said, and meant it. Later that evening, as we drove home through Charleston's historic streets, Marcus asked about my conversation with Stephanie. How do you feel? He said. Relieved, I answered. Like we can finally close that chapter completely. She's getting help, Jake and Rebecca are building a beautiful life together, Connor is paying for his crimes, and we survived it all stronger than before. Marcus squeezed my hand. Any regrets about going tonight? None. I'm glad we witnessed their beginning, and I'm glad I got closure with Stephanie. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that let you say goodbye properly. As we pulled into our driveway, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night at our rehearsal dinner. We'd learned that relationships can survive almost anything if both people are committed to working through problems together. We'd discovered that the truth is usually more complicated than it first appears. And we'd been reminded that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing not to let someone else's mistakes define your future. Our marriage had been baptized by fire before it even officially began, and we'd emerged not just intact, but genuinely stronger. Sometimes the worst nights lead to the most important lessons about what really matters. Marcus and I have been married for 3 years now, and we still talk about that rehearsal dinner sometimes. Not because it haunts us, but because it represents everything we've overcome together. We learned that love isn't about having a perfect story. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when everything falls apart around you. And sometimes the medical records that reveal the most important truths aren't about pregnancy tests or ultrasounds. They're about the human heart and its remarkable capacity to heal, forgive, and love again despite everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.